back to the Junius Maltby channel. Thanks for joining me. This is going to be a fun discussion. This is going to be done similar to a live, however, it is pre-recorded. Extemporaneous ramblings of a madman, unscripted, unprepared, not sponsored. You know the drill, the whole story. No, thanks for tuning in. This is going to be like a history talk, and if you've been part of this channel for any length of time, you are quite aware that I have a fascination with shipwreck silver, shipwreck coins. A lot of it dates back to my fascination with my perhaps favorite coin, which is the Spanish pieces of 8, the 8 reals. Just all of the mystery and the history and everything that involves Spanish silver dating back to the early colonial days, and how it kind of rose to become essentially the one world currency for centuries at a time. Over 250, 300 years. We talked about it just the other day, half a millennium, 500 years being minted, but circulating really globally as a powerful, I don't want to say currency, money. It was sound money. It was made of silver. And many of the wrecks, and this is where we get into the shipwreck side of things, with this money, this currency, this wealth being shipped around the world, literally every single day, all day, for hundreds and hundreds of years. Hurricanes, piracy, just faulty construction, worm-eaten wood, you name it, hitting reefs, accidents, hazards. A lot of ships had problems, had trouble, and there are lists and lists of shipwrecks from the 16th century, 17th century, 18th century. Lists of them, hundreds and hundreds of ships went to the bottom of the ocean. So a list so numerous it would be impossible for us to go back to like 1501 and discuss every wreck from 1500 to 1870s, 1880s. It would be a near impossible feat. But today's discussion is going to be on some of these shipwrecks, some of my favorites, some of the ones that you'll see come up oftentimes when researching coins from shipwrecks, or even if you just happen to be like me and I stumbled upon some of these wrecks on accident. Really, I would just be looking at pillar dollars, key search terms like pillar dollar, pieces of 8, 8 reals, things like that. And then I would attach the word, shipwreck or wreck into eBay. And I was always looking for, graded versions. I don't have very many of these. I like to just sometimes window shop. You know how a woman might walk down the street and window shop for articles of clothing or particular shoes that she might never even be able to afford or buy, or may not be intending on purchasing immediately, just for the sheer pleasure of window shopping. Well, I can do that pretty easily and not leave the comforts of my warm home and a cup of tea. And sometimes I'll find myself either reading history, monetary policy, and economic stuff like I normally do, but, browsing for silver, taking a break, and I'll find myself hunting through eBay for various shipwreck silver, just looking at it, admiring it. I only own, let me think, the El Cazador 8 reals coin from Mrs. Maltby. We'll talk about that wreck briefly. We don't need to go into too much detail because you guys should pretty much know everything about that wreck at this point. And I've got the piece that Lisa Willis sent me, which is a small 2 reals from the same wreck, the El Cazador. Those are the only 2 confirmed old shipwrecks from the Spanish era that I have. I do have a piece of silver from the submarine the German U-boat that sunk the shipment of silver to Saudi Arabia during World War II. We've talked about that coin. And then I've got some SS Gersopa remanufactured, like they took the silver from that find. Again, another World War II wreck. I really don't count those as list of old shipwrecks or Spanish silver shipwrecks. But those are also, remanufactured bars. And I've got the U.S., or not the U.S., it was the British Royal Mint Gersopa quarter ounce. But
the Cazador round that I got you is the best, though.
Yeah, it's my favorite one. I mentioned the Mrs. Maltby 8 reals from the El Cazador, the shipwreck that changed the world. And we're going to talk about that wreck a little bit here today. But the lists I've got pulled up just of the wrecks from the 1500s, so the 16th century and the 17th century, quite extensive. Again, so extensive we really don't even have the time to read through it all, but there really is not a year of those centuries that you could go through without finding lists after list of shipwreck. Let me just give you a few examples, okay? We'll go back to the 1500s. I said we're not going to read through all of these. And I've got some of my favorite wrecks pulled up with some coins we'll talk about. But let's just look at the, 1502, for example. That's a pretty long time ago. 1502, the 11th of July, the El Dorado, Spanish Carac, sank during a hurricane in the Mona Channel between Hispaniola and Puerto Rico. With the loss of all on board, El Dorado was the flagship of a 32-strong fleet heading for Spain. So this ship was heading back to Spain. It's 1502. Sources vary, but at least another 16 ships were also wrecked. Again, now every one of those wrecks, again, you're talking like 16 to 17 ships. Many of them, if they're heading back to Spain from the New World, were carrying, I'm sure some wealth, some jewels, some silver, some findings. And of course, as the colonial period advanced, we've talked about this at length, and we just have gone over the history recently of the 8 reals coin, so you should have that pretty firmly understood. We've done a couple readings on quite scholarly written pieces that we've read here on the Spanish silver and this time period. Now, you go forward a little bit, get to like 1526. You've got several major wrecks, ever from January, February, June. Many ships, the Sancti Spiritus, the Ancianata, Pedro Serrano, San Lesmes, San Gabriel, Santa Maria del Peral, Santa Teresa. Again, those are all ships that wrecked in 1526. And it's every year, 1527, 25, you go 1532, 1531. I'm reading through these, 1533, 37, 40. Non-stop shipwrecks all the way forward. And of course, as the traffic picked up, more and more ships on the seas, more and more ships in this dangerous region, which I don't know how much they understood, how well their knowledge was when it came to, and I'm not downplaying the sailors at this time period, but you wonder how firmly they understood the actual hurricanes and predictability of weather. I mean, they didn't have obviously satellites and the weather things. A lot of this was, shooting from the hip. And you'll see that with the 1715 fleet, how it got held up. They kind of launched those ships during a period where they should have kind of known better. It was like right into the height of hurricane season. And then, well, the 1715 treasure fleet's named that for a reason, because it became a treasure fleet. A lot of those ships ended up at the bottom of the ocean. And a significant economic blow to Spain at that time period. A lot of treasure lost, and a lot of pirates got quite wealthy getting a hold of that booty and doing some dives. Just tragic loss of wealth, but also a tragedy when it came to people trying to find. I didn't know this until I read a book about the golden age of piracy, how they would try to salvage these treasures, because a lot of times, 30 to 60 to 80, 90 feet of water, shallow regions, they would send slaves or people that were captured and such to forcibly dive down and retrieve articles and things from these sunken treasures. And quite incredible. A lot of people drowned doing that. Now, again, this is just going back to, real quick, I'm going to wrap up this century here, 1588, right? 1588, you go to September, unbelievable. There was so many ships sunk on there. All the way through the 1st of September, all the way to like the 28th, an extensive list of ships sinking. And then not just in the Bahamas region of the New World. Some of these were, had sunk off the coast of like Scotland or Ireland. A lot of times off the British coast or in those straits around Europe, just off the coast of Europe in general. A lot of these ships that were participating in trade would run aground or get lost in storms and such, crippled, sunk. And you'll see that. And a couple of the shipwrecks that are actually my favorite shipwrecks, or as far as the coins that were on them and the availability of them, were nowhere near the New World when they sank. And we'll talk about those ships like the Rusevic and the Hollandia and the Rygers Doll. There's a couple of shipwrecks there that we'll discuss and look at in a little bit more detail. Now, I'm going to move on. Again, real quick, 17th century shipwrecks. So 1601 all the way through 1699, extensive list, a lot of ships. Now, the 1622, you have the Nuestra Señora de la Consolación, a galleon-sized ship sank during the hurricane as Buen Jesus y Nuestra Señora del Rosario. Now, these were anytime you see galleon in the New World, and especially if it was heading back to Spain, these are ships that were likely carrying a significant amount of wealth and treasure. And there's coins out there on the market. If they've been salvaged or found, oftentimes with these ship names attached. And I believe Consolación is one of them, 1622. Obviously pretty early, predating really the golden age of piracy and such. But there were some things going on, a lot of trade, a lot of Spanish ships in the New World carrying hand-struck silver and gold at these times. Now, sticking with this year, though, 1622, one of the most famous, one of the biggest wrecks, the name is literally synonymous with treasure, is the Nuestra Señora de Atocha. The Atocha, famous ship, Spanish for Our Lady of Atocha, was a Spanish treasure galleon and the most widely known vessel of a fleet of ships that sank in a hurricane off of the Florida Keys, again, Florida, 1622. At the time of her sinking, Nuestra Señora de Atocha was heavily laden with copper, silver, gold, tobacco, gems, and indigo from Spanish ports at Cartagena and Portobello in New Granada, present-day Colombia and Panama, respectively, and Havana, and it was again bound for Spain, so big ship, bound for Spain, full of stuff. The Nuestra Señora de Atocha was named for a holy shrine in Madrid, Spain. It was a heavily armed Spanish galleon that served as the almirante, the rear guard, for the Spanish fleet. It would trail behind the other ships in the flota to prevent an attack from the rear. Now, much of the wreck of the Nuestra Señora de Atocha was famously recovered by an American commercial treasure hunting expedition in 1985. Following a lengthy court battle against the state of Florida, the finders were ultimately awarded sole ownership of the rights to the treasure. Now, the Atocha was built for the Spanish crown in Havana in 1620. She was rated at 550 tons with an overall length of 112 feet, a beam of 34 feet, and a draft of 14 feet. She carried a square-rigged fore and mainmast and a lateen-rigged mizzenmast. Although there is no existing records, she likely had a high stern castle, a low waist, and a high forecastle, as was typical for an early 17th century Spanish galleon. Now here's the sinking part. The Nuestra Señora de Atocha had been delayed in Veracruz before she could rendezvous in Havana with the vessels of the Tierra Firme mainland fleet. The treasure, which arrived by mule in Panama City, was so immense that it took 2 months to record and load it onto the Atocha. After still more delays in Havana, what was ultimately a 28-ship convoy did not manage to depart Spain until the 4th of September, 1622, 6 weeks late. I believe this happened, if I'm not mistaken, as well with the 1715 fleet, which we'll talk about in a minute. But there's these delays that occurred back then, and of course, when you're late, bad things can happen. Each ship in the convoy carried crew, soldiers, passengers, provisions, and treasures from all over South America. The Atocha alone carried a cargo whose estimates range between $250 and $500 million, including silver from Peru and Mexico, gold and emeralds from Colombia, and pearls from Venezuela, as well as more common goods, including worked silverware, tobacco, and bronze cannons. In the second day of its voyage from Havana, the convoy was overtaken by a hurricane in the Florida Straits. By the morning of the 6th of September, 8 of the ships had sunk, and their remains lay scattered from the Marquesas Key to the dry Tortugas. The Nuestra Señora de Atocha had lost all of her 265 crew and passengers, except for 3 sailors and 2 slaves, who survived by clinging to the mizzenmast. Among the sailors killed in the disaster was Bartolome Garcia de Nodal, explorer of the Straits of Magellan, surrounding Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America. All of her treasure sank with the ship, approximately 30 leagues, 140 kilometers, from Havana. After the surviving ships brought the news of this disaster back to Havana, Spanish authorities dispatched another 5 ships to salvage the Nuestra, Señora de Atocha, and the Santa Margarita, which had run aground nearby. Nuestra Señora de Atocha had sunk in approximately 17 meters, or 56 feet of water, making it difficult for divers to retrieve any of her cargo or guns from the ship. A second hurricane, on the 5th of October of that year, made attempts to salvage even more difficult by scattering the wreckage of the sunken ship still further. It just gives me anxiety thinking about all that silver and gold just being pushed around on the ocean floor. The Spaniards undertook salvage operations for several years with the use of Indian slaves and recovered nearly half of the registered part of its cargo from the holds of the Santa Margarita. The principal method used for the recovery of this cargo was a large brass diving bell with a glass window on one side, and a slave would ride to the bottom, recover an item, and then return to the surface by being hauled up by the men on deck. It was often lethal, but more or less effective. Dead slaves were recorded as a business expense by the captains of the salvage ships. Now, the loss of the 1622 fleet was a severe blow to the Spanish commercial interests, forcing the crown to borrow more to finance its role in the ongoing 30 Years' War, and to sell several galleons to raise funds. The Spanish worked diligently and were able to salvage most of the Santa Margarita over the next 10 years. And this part's incredible. However, in the 60 years of searching afterward, the Spanish never located the Atocha. It eluded everyone. And I'll just keep reading because the discovery and legal battle regarding the Atocha is actually fascinating. There's a lot more detailed information out there if you ever cared to read about it. If you're familiar with the name Mel Fisher, it should be familiar to you if you've ever read about treasure ships, sunken treasure, all of that, because his name comes up quite often. They have their own website where you can actually go and buy salvaged shipwreck coins and various jewels and other items. But regarding the Atocha, beginning in 1969, American treasure hunters Mel Fisher, Finley Ricard, and a team of subcontractors funded by investors and others in a joint venture, Treasure Salvers, Inc., they searched the seabed for the Atocha for 16 and a half years. Now think of that, 16 and a half years, that's dedication. It's a long time of coming up empty-handed. You got to hand it to these treasure hunters. In 1970, Fisher recovered portions of the wrecked cargo of the sister ship, Santa Margarita, so he must have known he was like on the right trail, or he was definitely in the right area. He also proposed the idea to several other potential helpers who were discouraged by the fact that this dangerous professional diving job would be paid at minimum wage unless the ship could be found. Silver bars, apparently from the Atocha, were found in 1973, with cannon inscribed such to verify the wreck of the Atocha were found by Fisher's son, Dirk, in 1975. Subsequently, a substantial part of its remaining cargo, this is the part that fascinates me, the stern castle, the remaining cargo of silver and gold and emeralds was discovered. They found a lot of them. But wait till you hear this part about the missing stern castle. Fisher's son, Kane, he was the one that radioed the news to Treasure Salvers headquarters on the Florida coast from the salvage boat Dauntless. Now, the coins from this ship, you can go online, you can buy them, you can look them up. They're expensive. There's a reason I don't own any Atocha silver or gold for that matter. Very difficult to come by, quite costly, just because of the historical connections that these coins have. You know, this is the world record. Like, I believe this is the largest shipwreck monetarily in history. The salvage coins, both gold and silver, were minted primarily between 1598 and 1621. So very early coinage, very early Spanish silver. Although numerous earlier dates were represented as well, some of the dates extended well back into the 16th century. Many of the dates and types of the period had been either rare or unknown prior to the salvage of the wreck. So think of that. There's coins they pulled out of the Atocha that were certain variants they didn't even really know existed at the time. It's understood by experts, this is the best part, that the stern castle, it just makes me want to go look for it. That's the part of the ship that would hold the most of the gold and rare Muzo emeralds. It's still missing from the shipwreck. These and other valuable items would have been stored in the captain's cabin for safekeeping in the rear part of the Nuestra, Señora de Atocha, which is a lot of times they would, and from what I've read, these highly valuable items that would be held in the captain's quarters or in that vicinity were often put into certain containers or trunks, chests. They almost look like what you would think of as a treasure chest. And then sometimes, I believe it was the packaging inside or even the outside, the entirety of it was like dipped in wax. And that's one of the reasons, we'll get to it, another wreck that we're going to talk about today. The coins are so very well preserved because when silver hits salt water and gets sloshed around on the ocean floor with the sand everywhere, you've seen this. A lot of times the coins get quite worn to the point where they're almost unrecognizable. You can't make out any details or dates. But some coins are actually discovered from these wrecks in very good condition. Now, after the discovery, of course, the government gets involved. State of Florida tried to claim title over the wreck. They had to fight this legally for years because Florida wanted 25% of the treasure. And after 8 years of litigation, the Supreme Court ruled in the favor of the treasure salvers. And the state got nothing, which is amazing. I love that. I love that. June 2000. They're still finding stuff from this wreck, by the way. They still find stuff from the Atocha. In June 2011, Mel Fisher's treasure salver guys, they found an antique emerald ring that's also believed to be from the wreck, estimated to be worth over $500,000. Incredible, incredible treasure. Again, we could be here all night. The list of shipwrecks and treasures, especially from this time period, is extensive. The goal for me of obtaining a coin from essentially every wreck or every famous wreck would be a monumental feat in it of itself to try to accomplish that as far as some form of numismatic collection, having a particular example from each wreck. But the next amazing wreck that we're going to talk about is the 1715 treasure fleet. It's famous. The date alone, 1715, should conjure up images of that romantic period of piracy on the high seas. 1715. It's just such an early time period still during the colonial times, but also, just incredible time period in this region as far as the Bahamas, Florida, the coast, the eastern coast of the Gulf of Mexico, and those countries down there, Panama, all of it, the trade, the mining taking place in Bolivia and Mexico, the silver coins being minted and shipped around the world, procuring spices and porcelain and silk, and just all of the ships and the galleons, the goods and services being exchanged, just in a bustling, amazing, vibrant time period. Now, during this time, 1715 treasure fleet was a Spanish treasure fleet, and as I've said before, this is the time, like when they're returning from the New World to Spain, they're bringing back their booty. These things were just heavy, laden with treasure. And at 2 a.m, this group of ships on Wednesday, July 31st, 1715, just 7 days after departing Havana, Cuba, under the command of Juan Esteban de Ulloa, 11 of the 12 ships of this fleet were lost in a hurricane near present-day Vero Beach, Florida. Now, because the fleet was carrying silver, it is also known as the 1715 Plate Fleet, plata being the Spanish word for silver. Now, some artifacts and even coins still wash up on Florida beaches from time to time. That's incredible. So keep your eyes out if you're in Florida walking along a beach in this area, Vero Beach, Florida. Man, I would hope you can use a metal detector around that beach, especially with coins still being pushed up on the sand. Now, according to Cuban records, there was around 1,500 sailors that perished, while a small number survived on lifeboats. Many ships, including pirates, took part in the initial salvage. Initially, a privateer, Henry Jennings, was first accused of piracy for attacking such salvage ships and claiming their salvages. And in one of the books I have on the golden age of piracy, there's actually a story, historical account of these pirates essentially storming and attacking a beach at night in order to seize treasure from those that were there salvaging it. Because, when these treasure ships went down, they would often take slaves or other personnel and force them to dive, depending on the depths of the water, to retrieve whatever treasure was down there that they could. And as that was being done, they would haul the treasure back to the beach to store it, with the goal in mind of eventually delivering it back to Spain. And it was a perfect opportunity, for the pirates. All these guys are doing their work for them, just collecting all the sunken treasure, putting it on the beach. And so these pirates came and took what they wanted. That's what they did. They had force, they had weapons, they had swords and muskets, pistols. Now, exhibits and preserves. Treasure hunter Kip Wagner's team built an exhibit held at the National Geographic Explorers Hall in D.C. It was featured in the 1965 issue of National Geographic. So this is a pretty early wreck to be found, way back then. 1965 issue of National Geographic. This was the beginning of a fine collection of the 1715 plate fleet treasure, and it brought hundreds of visitors from around the world. Wagner published a book, Pieces of Eight, Recovering the Riches of a Lost Spanish Fleet, in 1966. This is a detailed account of the finding and the exploration of many of these shipwrecks along Florida, the Treasure Coast. An exhibit was set up with a grand opening on May 1st, 1967, at the First National Bank of Satellite Beach, Florida. In 1987, another ship in this fleet, the Urca del Lima, became the first shipwreck in the Florida underwater archaeological preserves. And then Mel Fisher, we just read about their company. They have he sold the rights. So he sold the rights, get this is crazy, to the 1715 fleet shipwreck to Queen's Jewels LLC. So he sold the rights to this wreck. And then in 2015, the 1715 fleet, right? Queen's Jewels, the company who bought it from Mel Fisher, and their founder, Brent Brisbane, discovered $4.5 million in gold coins off the coast of Florida. The coins come from the 1715 fleet shipwreck. So way to go. And then there's a list of ships that were part of this wreck, list of the identified known ships: Urca de Lima, HMS Hampton Court, Cristo de San Roman, Nuestra Señora de la Nieves, then Nuestra Señora del Rosario y San Francisco Javier, the Nuestra Señora de Carmen y San Antonio. So lots of ships involved in this, and a tremendous amount of gold. Rare gold escudos, 8 reals, silver cobs, tremendous amount of wealth. It was literally called the Treasure Fleet. Now there's a few more ships that really captivate me just because of the size of the treasures on them. Some of it is, even just the time period itself, the story behind them. The ones that come to mind: Rusevic, if I'm pronouncing that properly, the Hollandia, the Cazador, and the Rygers Doll. All of these ships, again, fitting a different part of history, this time period, the movement of wealth and goods. The first one we'll talk about quickly, the Rusevic. It's a Dutch word. It was a ship that belonged to the Dutch East India Company. Their symbol was VOC. A very famous company from this time period when it came to moving, spices and rum and just the overall trade taking place between the east and the west, between Europe and India. And this ship sank in 1740. So again, a lot of the coins on it that you look up and you'll see images of, there were the pillar dollars that you and I think of, the milled dollars. And then there are some, I believe, even older cobs that were on the Rusevic ship as well, because it was such an early time period. You know, the 8 reals, the pillar dollar that the uniform, consistent pillar dollar that I think of when I say that, was only first struck in 1732, so it was only really out for about 8 years. And so there was a lot of coin on this ship that was not the more modern, what you would consider modern produced method of the pillar dollar. Now the ship went down in an area called the Goodwin Sands. And when I read about it more detailed once, it just sounds like a very shallow, almost troublesome with the currents and the way the sands shifted on the bottom passageway off the coast of England. And I think it's off the coast of Kent. And it just sounds like when you read about it, I'm not a sailor and I don't have a ship, but when I read about the cause of the wreck, how it got caught in the sand and just battered and beaten by these waves, it seemed like it was a pretty obvious snafu. Like they almost took the risk and tried to shoot the gauntlet and get through there, but didn't work out for them. The wreck was discovered on the Goodwin Sands by an amateur diver in 2004. It lies in about 24 meters, 79 feet of water at the northeast end of Kellet Gut. Now, it makes me wonder, did they have any idea when this ship disappeared back then? They probably didn't know. They probably didn't know where the thing sank, if it just went down in the middle of the night somewhere and if no one survived, if it went down with all hands. In December 2005, it was made public that between May and September of that year, a team led by Rex Cowan had recovered some of the ship and its contents. Now, I actually had at one point been in contact with one of the guys that was part of the salvage of this ship. He'd emailed me and I'd emailed him. We'd gone back and forth a few times. I don't have a coin from the Rusevic, but I just corresponded with an individual who was, part of the recovery of this ship. And he did have 8 reals available, but they were, beyond what I was willing to pay for a specimen of a coin from this ship. They were just remarkable specimens, incredible detail and condition. Now, so they discovered the ship. This was done in secrecy to avoid attracting looters. Artifacts recovered included approximately 1,000 bars of silver, gold coins, and a mustard jar. A mustard jar, great. When the VOC was disbanded in 1798, its possessions fell to the Batavian Republic, the legal successor of which is the current Dutch state, which therefore is entitled to the objects from the Rusevic. They were presented to Junior Minister of Finance Jupe Wind in Plymouth on the 11th of December 2005. The types of coins recovered were several hundred Mexican silver cobs of the 1720s and the early 1730s, and transitional clips of 1733 to 1734, as well as many more hundreds of pillar dollars and a smattering of cobs from other mints. However, archaeologists have determined up to half of the money on board was intended for illegal trade, as they were not part of the sanctioned cargo. This is interesting. Many of the discovered coins were also made with small, deliberate holes, which suggests that the crewmen were sewing them into their clothes to smuggle them to the Dutch East Indies. Crewmen who were able to make a profit off of buying silver in the Netherlands and then selling it in the Dutch East Indies where there was no silver mines over there. Obviously, these guys were playing with the arbitrage game. They were gonna sell silver that they smuggled in or brought in for a profit. Now, despite being illegal, the VOC tolerated the smuggling because the profit benefited both the smugglers and the company. After the wreck, The floor timbers collapsed, causing the decks of the ship to fall on top of each other. This provides a snapshot of the physical and social aspects of life on board the 3 layers. The top layer consisted of the officer's dining room, the middle layer the constable's cabin, containing 50 muskets, and the bottom layer included the cartridge locker and the gun deck, containing bar and round shot. In 2005, salvage operations led to criticism from heritage organizations worldwide, as some of the international principles concerning the protection of archaeological heritage. So they were a little bit upset about the salvage operations, or how they were doing it, perhaps. In 2007, the Rusevic was designated as a protected wreck site under UK legislation, which prevented further salvage work taking place. That's too bad. Statutory Instrument 2007/61 defines the restricted area as a circle or a radius 150 meters centered on 51 degrees 16'443 north and 1 degree 34.537 east. The Netherlands changed their policy in that same year, making it impossible to issue further salvage rights for the historic shipwrecks. The ship's remains lie at a depth of some 25 meters and are owned by the Dutch government. In 2016, the wreck was placed on Historic England's Heritage at Risk Register. The Rusevic was at high risk due to the persistent erosion, shipworm attacking the wood, and the high threat of unauthorized diving. Oh, well, I could imagine if you knew there was coins down there and no one was getting them, you might as well somebody might go get them. But there are examples of Rusevic coins online. They're available. You can get them. Oftentimes, the ones I've seen are beautiful. And, the sinking date of 1740. The ship was launched, I believe, 1737. Really old coins. Really beautiful. Really early pillar dollars. And some of them, I doubt, ever even really circulated. They probably got purchased again by the Dutch East India Company because it was the world recognized unit of account. It was like the coin you had to have to do trade. They filled the ship up with them, and then, well, they lost them. And from what I understand, it was the shifting sands beneath that site, and the ship probably got caught on what you would imagine is like a big dune, just a big mountain of sand out in the middle of this strait, and then was battered after running into the sand and sank. And since then, the sands have shifted, obviously. Now, the next ship, not a whole lot to discuss on this one. It's just an interesting specimen, same time period, with coins that are available, easily found and graded. This was the Hollandia. This was sank in 1742. Another Dutch East India Company ship. I don't know how this company stayed in business. Year after year, they were losing so much. Can you imagine how much silver and gold they must have had to where they could lose entire ships worth of it and, just keep on going. So this, the Dutch East India Company wrecked on Annet Isles of Scilly. This is the 13th of July, 1743, causing 276 fatalities. So it was a 1742 ship, and it was lost in 1743. So it was only sailing for a year. I mean, they launched it in 1742, and July 13th, 1743, she sunk. The wreck was discovered in 1971 by Rex Cowan, a London attorney. And that's a similar name, same name actually, I would imagine it's just the same guy that helped discover the Rusevic. Hollandia was built by the Dutch East India Company in 1742 in Amsterdam to a new design as a 32-gun, 700-ton ship with a length of 42 meters. That's 138 feet. On June 3rd, 1743, she left Texel as part of a Batavia-bound fleet carrying a large amount of trade coin and several important passengers. On the 13th of July, 1743, she became separated from the fleet and struck Gunner Rock near Annet Isles off Scilly in the early hours of the morning, sinking nearby with the loss of all hands. So everybody died. Rex Cowan began his search for Hollandia in 1968, starting with the Dutch and English archives and using advanced, for the time, equipment such as a proton magnetometer, finally locating the wreck on the 16th of September 1971. A large quantity of coins was recovered, as well as bronze cannons and mortars. So, beautiful ship there, going to the bottom, the Hollandia, 1743. And again, there's some remarkable 8 reals that came from this ship. I've seen them online, oftentimes, again, beyond most of our means. But there's some gorgeous coins, 1737, 1730s, and officially, graded and confirmed, certified to be from the wreck. Most of these coins, when they're shipwreck coins, have an unmistakable, like, saltwater patina and type of erosion on the surface. Very hard to duplicate. I don't know if anyone ever even actually has. I'm sure you could throw a coin in the ocean to fake it and have give it that shipwreck look. But you'll notice that on most of the shipwreck coins have kind of this worn appearance that's unique to being held underwater for quite a long time. Now, all of you should be familiar with the El Cazador ship. I've talked about this. I've read about it. I've done several discussions on it. Very important. It's the only shipwreck coin of this time period, the only shipwreck coin of Spanish silver, or even related to the Spanish Empire in any way that I have. So I'm pretty proud of it. I've got an 8 reals from Mrs. Maltby, and I've got a 2 reals from one of our favorite viewers here and channel family members, Lisa Willis. So there are El Cazador coins out there. I know some of you have picked them up. You've shared that with me. A remarkable story, really cool story on economics, on an empire trying to, maintain some form of economic order, trying to inject sound money into a fiat-rich, failing economy, losing the sound money, and then, of course, history being altered because of the custody of the land that surrounded the entire story. So it's worth it just to read about it, the El Cazador, what took place, how it happened, and essentially how the United States ended up with Louisiana Purchase territory. So yeah, it's remarkable. Very important ship when it comes to just all of the different shipwrecks that are out there to discuss. And the thing about it's a much later ship, the El Cazador. It sank in 1784. Most of the coins that I've ever seen come from the ship were struck in like 1783. There are earlier coins on the ship. There's very few of the actual earlier pillar dollars. Most of these have a bust on the coin, and they're not the shield and pillar dollar struck from 1732 to 17. When was it? I believe it was 1772 was the last year, and then after that there was the Charles, putting the busts and the kings on the coin rather than just the symbols of the Spanish Empire. Change the coin there. There's both, however, were found on the El Cazador. It just happens most of the coins that you'll see examples of are like 1783, and very few. I've seen very few of, especially the 8 reals full size, that were struck any earlier than that. El Cazador, wonderful ship, Gulf of Mexico, again, just south of Louisiana. Sunk in 1784, wasn't found till August 2nd, 1993, by a fishing trawler called the Mistake. I always think that's an ironic, the Mistake. Captain Jerry Murphy. They pulled up fishing nets, is the story, and spilled a bunch of silver dollars and silver coins all over the deck of their boat, and realized that they had struck silver. They'd discovered a shipwreck. Unbelievable. Now, the last ship that I've got pulled up that's kind of on my list of coins to get, again, all of these are kind of those big ticket ship coins that I wanted to find into my collection one day. Obviously, the Atocha, the 1715 Treasure Fleet, the Hollandia, the Rygers Doll is the one here we're looking at. And of course, the Rusevic we discussed earlier. Any of these, but a lot of them you'll see are Dutch East India ships. Just something about that company, there's a lot of mystery behind it, just fascinates me, the trade that was going on back then. Now the Rygers Doll, or the Rygers Doll, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it properly. A lot of beautiful pieces of 8 come from this ship. I've seen some exquisite examples out there. Now this ship, again, Dutch East India, these guys, the hits just keep coming. Merchant ship was lost October 26th, 1747, a little bit later than some of the last Dutch East India ships that we saw get sunk in the 1740s, early 1740s. Now, it sunk after striking a reef while trying to hold anchor in heavy seas off the west coast of South Africa, a long ways from home. The vessel, sailing out of Amsterdam, carried over 30,000 Spanish colonial coins as part of her cargo for trade at ports in the Spice Islands of the East Indies. Salvage operations in 1979, conducted by South Africans Arthur Ridge and Jimmy Raw, resulted in the recovery of nearly 6,800 coins, most of them the 8 reals pillar dollars. Variety struck at the Spanish colonial mints located in Mexico City. So again, beautiful coins. You can actually see some examples at New World Treasures online and other locations. But these are from the Rygers Doll, however you pronounce that. Amazing, though. Amazing story. Again, just another part of that time period, the spice trades, the 1740s, the Dutch East India Company sailing the high seas with holes full of silver. All of these, when it gets right down to it for me, the importance is these tell not only the story of the times, I mean, it really is just a palpable piece of history, an incredible physical form of history to hold in your hands coins struck of silver and gold that were mined in the New World, fashioned and struck into these coins, and then sent forth to deal and to trade with all the continents and all the cultures of the entire world, sitting in the hulls of these incredibly I'm going to say well-built ships, because they were. I mean, you try to build a sailing ship today, a vessel like anything like these. Obviously, they took some damage. Some of them didn't make it. But, you have these wonderful coins sitting in the hulls of these beautiful ships, just during an incredibly mysterious and adventurous time in human history. And, it's not without its sin. It's not without its blood. It's not without, haunting things that occurred. I'm not saying it was a perfect time period by any means, but it's fascinating. The silver, and when you hold Spanish 8 reals in your hands that were, buying spices, porcelains, and teas, and fabrics, and silks, and all these different things, and being exchanged or even smuggled. If you have a coin from the Rusevic wreck and there's a piercing in it or a hole in the coin, you know that it was most likely being worn by a sailor who was sneaking it into the other countries to trade with it. So pretty cool. Anyways, I love talking shipwrecks. I love reading about shipwrecks. I love reading about finding shipwrecks and the treasures from all of these different ships. So if you're curious on that, there's more reading. You guys can check out, look at Mel Fisher's store online. There's a store that he's got. There's, the rest of his soul, obviously he's not alive anymore, but his heirs run it. There's newworldtreasures.com. Newworldtreasures.com has really great examples of some coins. And there's Cannon Beach, I believe it's called. Cannon Beach, something like that. There's Sedgwick Coins. Sedgwickcoins.com often has a lot of good treasure coins you can check out. Collector Society. And then, of course, newworldtreasures.com. We already talked about them. I don't remember the site name for Mel Fisher's. I think it's Fisher's Treasure or Mel Fisher Treasure, something like that. And I think they even have an Atocha site by itself. All of that easily searchable. Be careful when you're looking at these. I've told you this before, but especially on eBay, make sure it's confirmed. Make sure it's legit, good seller, a good graded package, if anything. You can confirm it. You can look it up by barcode number and see the exact coin in like a PCGS or an NGC archive someplace. But anyway, shipwreck coins are fun. They're an amazing part of history, an amazing part of numismatics, monetary history, the history of colonialism, the New World, the Old World, all of this. I mean, they are an integral piece of history. They truly are. I mean, there's nothing else like it. When you hold them, when you think about that tumultuous last moments, the last time it was on the surface, essentially, back then, what was going on, what the sounds were like. It's just, haunting. Very haunting. There's something haunting about shipwreck coins. And I'll just leave it at that. I'll close with that. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being part of the Junius Maltby channel for this discussion, this brief, boring podcast, this reading, this rambling, meandering about silver, gold, and treasure from the bottom of the sea. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good one.